I wanted to address Whoopi Goldberg's Pfaff on The View here recently, talking about the Holocaust. She said that the Holocaust wasn't about race, it was about how humanity treats humanity, how badly one group of people can treat another. And she isn't expressly incorrect, mainly because it's a far more complex issue than I think most people realize historically, from a historical context, but also from the political propagandistic process that Hitler used. The principal issue here is the racism, the anti-gay, anti-disabled, anti-Jewish, anti-age, or ageist positions that were presented by Hitler during, leading up to and during World War II, was all political theater. It was propaganda. What it was really about was getting free slave labor. The problem that exists is that Hitler was a student of history, and he learned that wars were won on the backs of labor. And what was he to do? He was trying to not only take over Germany, but bring Germany back to a state of an empire. And so he thought to other groups of people, to scapegoat them, to claim that it was the Jews who caused the downfall of the German people, not the previous war and poor leadership. He sought to blame different minority groups, and he did so with extreme efficiency, to the point where he could use that superficial propaganda, that superficial othering, to hijack people so that he could gain a slave labor force. What most people don't realize is the concentration camps, which led to the mass extinction and mass murder of millions of people, were there to be free labor, disposable labor. The sad truth is that he knew that if he wanted to win a war, wanted to make the Third Reich, he needed slave labor. So he utilized these propaganda tricks, the racism, the anti-Semitism, and the like, to gain a justification, to capture people without any attempt by the German people to stop it, because they were afraid of these groups of people, because they had been othered and scapegoated. And then in turn, he killed off the disabled. He killed off the old and the infirmed. He killed off anybody that couldn't effectively do labor. And in doing so, he demoralized those who were left in the concentration camps, who were mostly men, and forced them to mine, forced them to dig out tunnels, forced them to build equipment, forced them to be test subjects. So when Whoopi Goldberg said it wasn't about racism, she was actually fairly correct. Because on a very superficial level, yeah, race was a part of it, but it wasn't. The driving force wasn't, I hate blacks or I hate Jews. Driving force was, I need slave labor that I don't have to pay for, that's disposable. And the Anti-Defamation League, well, their position is fair, because 6 million Jewish people plus, we don't know the exact numbers, could be more, were killed in the Holocaust. And it is a deranged, horrible event in our history that we should not forget. We also need to take a step back and realize that is the act of othering, the act of scapegoating people through political means and for political drive that led to the Holocaust. It was the act and need for slave labor that drove the Holocaust, because Hitler had a specific goal in mind, and he knew he needed it. And the biggest problem here, and the biggest takeaway we should have as a people, especially in the United States right now, is that it is this act of othering, this scapegoating, which creates political divides. And it is what's causing the political divide right now in the United States. Every single time you hear a politician or pundit say, transgender shouldn't be allowed to use the bathroom that they associate with their identity and gender, because they're going to harass or sexually abuse a child. That's the same rhetoric that Hitler used. Every single time you hear a political pundit or a newscaster with a political bent, or a politician saying there are these caravans of immigrants and they're coming here to steal your jobs or to bring in drugs, that is the same rhetoric that Hitler used. Every single time you hear somebody else to justify a position that would demean and dehumanize another person based on race or creed or where they come from or their sexuality or their gender identity or their apparent gender or their age, that is the same rhetoric that was used by Hitler to instigate the Holocaust. Every time it happens, every time it is used in the United States, it is another step forward towards fascism. And we need to understand and learn from history the mistakes made so that we don't repeat them again. Which is why I am furious, actually, right now, because of all of these different politicians attacking critical race theory. Critical race theory. Most people don't even understand what it is. It is not even taught in K through 12. It is an upper level college course that discusses the implicit and explicit impacts of social racism and cultural racism, which creates inherent biases within different systems that impact people who are of color or of a specific creed, or if they're gay or bi or part of the transgender groups or LGBTQ. Critical race theory looks at the implicit biases that persist within our culture. It's not taught in K through 12, but it's being attacked as though it is. And now we have people trying to ban books which discuss things like the Holocaust in a way that children can understand it, because it might make children feel uncomfortable, quote unquote. Humanity is filled with uncomfortable things in our history. We have to teach it. We have to understand it and learn from it. And when we do a disservice, like banning books or banning the teaching of the racial inequity and inequality that exists in this country to this day due to a past, a history of that same inequality, we are only dooming ourselves to repeat the past. So to Whoopi Goldberg, I applaud you for saying what you said. Because you were right. It was about the worst of humanity. And you shouldn't have been attacked for what you said. You shouldn't have been attacked for stating a fact, that the racism was a superficial effect, a propagandistic effect from Hitler, who had ultimately different goals and a different purpose for what he did in and during the Holocaust. It is part of the history that is often ignored, glossed over, and the fact that wars are won on the backs of people who suffer, be it the victims of attacks or those who are enslaved to do labor, is a truth that most people don't want to acknowledge, even to this day. So I thank you for watching. Please, if you want to learn about the Holocaust, please go and actually read in depth the historical events, the propaganda, how it worked, and why that same type of propaganda is working today.